Welcome to Higher Praise.
Okay, we'll go ahead and kick it off tonight with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the life-giving rain that you brought, and we are so blessed, Lord, with such a beautiful fall and the farmers getting their crops in, and we know that all this food's going to be important in the world scene as it's unfolding. We thank you, Lord, so much for our prayers being answered with Bishop brought safely home, and we ask, Lord, that you'll be with us tonight. Open our minds and our ears, and so that our word may flow and increase our wisdom, knowledge, and discernment. In Jesus' name we pray these things. Amen. Okay, I'll probably talk a little quick tonight. I've got enough to spend a couple hours, and we're not going to do that. But one thing I was trying to decide where to do this at the beginning or the end. I'm going to do it at the beginning because I don't want to run out of time. That's very important. And it leads into the talking about Bishop being back home. If you want to follow me, I'm going to read a section in Matthew 24, verses 9 to 14. And I think, with all the stuff we've been talking about, you're probably familiar with this, but I came across some stuff thinking about Bishop's trip, and I wanted to point out and make sure everyone understands what he's really involved in. Then they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations on account of my name. And now at that time many will fall away and will deliver up one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and will mislead many. And because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, he shall be saved. And here's the key verse out of this part of the Great Commission. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world for a witness to all nations, and then the end shall come. And that's what we're involved in right now, and especially Bishop, in that we are seeing on a very rapid basis the word being put out in that part of the world that it's not been exposed to. I don't know if you're familiar or not. And Heather brought it up at lunch today. We were eating, and I knew about it, but I forgot exactly what the definition was. But it's called the 1040 window. Some of you may be familiar with. And what that is, it's if you take and lay a map of the world out flat on a table, and you mark the area, you make a rectangle in between the 10th north latitude and go down to the 40th south latitude, and you make a triangle across the world. If you do that, and you look at let me tell you what's inside that. 2/3 of all the people in the world live in that area of that rectangle. 2/3. 90% of them, and this was a few years ago data, but 90% of them had not heard the good news. As an example, in 1989, Mongolia had 4 Christians that they knew of, just 4. Today, they have 10,000. Yeah. In that triangle, 85% of the poorest of the poor of the world live in that area. Islam, Buddha, and Hindu are the center religions in that area. And the key to this is that verse 14 is describing where we're at in the end times in regards to that. With the advent of the internet, telephone, TV, etc., it has greatly accelerated the ability to get the word to people in these areas, but it's still a people-to-people thing. And here's what's important in this, and I believe, and Bishop can correct me if I'm wrong, but let me give you an example of what he's doing. I'm going to use Yemen as an example, and Yemen's one of the countries that's in this triangle. Last year, within the first 30 days after Biden took office, he removed the Houthis, which are the rebel terrorists in Yemen. He removed them from the terrorist list. Really honked off all the Arab nations, especially Saudi Arabia, UAE. They were really upset with it because especially Saudi Arabia has been battling the Yemeni Houthis for the last few years. Actually, it started in 2014, 2015. Iran started supporting the Houthis and stirred things up, and they started a coup of sorts, and it kind of really got the country separated. And it's a Sunni Shiite battle. About 25% of Yemen are Shiites, about 75 Sunni, which is kind of the world mix. But the Shiites in Yemen started fighting the Sunnis, and of course, Saudi Arabia is almost all Sunni. They were supporting it, but you start thinking, well, what's the big deal about Yemen? Well, Yemen's a really big deal. It's one of these areas that we don't hear anything about, but can really be the place where a fire starts. I hate to say starting World War III, we're at war right now. There's no doubt about that. It just hasn't escalated further. But Yemen sits in the southeast. It's actually the southwest corner of the Asian continent. Actually, if you go across the peninsula there, you go into North Africa. It sits on the north part of the Arabian Sea. The Red Sea comes up alongside of it, and the reason it's so important is that's where so much of the oil is shipped out of the Red Sea. It comes out of Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Mideast. A lot of it comes out there into the Arabian Ocean, and the straits are narrow. And so, whoever controls that area has, got their thumb on the world. To show you the importance of it, I got reading the other day, every major country in the world is involved there. China, England, Germany, Russia, United States, it's just going down the list. Everybody's involved in that part of the world. But I wanted to show you, and what brought it to my mind this week was there was kind of a ceasefire. Biden administration thing was, well, we're going to take them off the terrorist list, and we're going to start talking to the Houthis, and we're going to be buddies. And their overall concern was that there were so many people starving in Yemen. And they are. There's no doubt about that. I'll give you some figures here in a minute. But the thing of it was that those people, just like what the pastor's been telling us, yeah, they'll start talking to us, and they'll be buddy, and we can ship them grain, and oh yeah, we'll take your grain. You keep sending that down, we'll talk to you. And it ends up on the black market. And what they're doing, they're taking the grain and stuff and selling it to the people we're supposed to be giving it to. And that's how the terrorists fund themselves in one way. Just like what the pastor's talked about several times recently. So Biden took them off the terrorist list this last week. And I think it's because of what's going on in Ukraine. They perceive that the United States is so weak right now. There could be a lot happen the next couple of weeks before the election because they don't know whether the Republicans here are going to take back over. There's no way of knowing who's going to be running the country until the election's over. So anyhow, what they did, they started throwing drones. The Houthis do, Iranian drones. They're shooting drones at the oil complexes that's in Aden. Aden is on the coast clear down on the coast of Yemen, and it's a major oil port. And the Houthis are saying, hey, if you don't start giving us some of the oil revenue, we're going to blow up your tankers as they come in. Well, they launched drones at them just the day before yesterday. And to show them, say, hey, we can do what we say we're doing. So this drone warfare is really getting to be the thing. They attacked the El Dahabi port and came very close to hitting a tanker that was coming in to load. But let's get back to talking about how this impacts and what Bishop is doing. There's 30 million people in Yemen. 75% of them are in poverty, extreme poverty. There are 2 million children actually starving right now. Not just hungry, they're starving. And all the foreign Christians have been forced out of the country. And this is where we tie into what Bishop's doing. And as I said, when he comes up, he can correct me if I'm wrong on my assumptions. But I came across, give it a second load, here we go. I came across an article talking Christianity is on the rise in Yemen. Stop and think about that. It says Christianity in Yemen appears to be growing despite the immense dangers Christians face there. According to Open Doors, many foreign Christians have left the country and local Christians are facing increasing persecution. My computer's playing games with me. Come on. The thing I was going to point out here is that just like in, we're talking about Mongolia, there were only 4 Christians in the late 1980s. Now, during the time that China's become more and more, the communists more and more in control, they've pushed all the Christians out of Mongolia. In fact, they're persecuting the Mongolians now. But stop and think, how is that possible? Well, how it's possible is because these people that were there, the missionaries that went in, planted the seed. They were fulfilling what Christ gave in the Great Commission to witness to all the nations and to the whole world. Let me try this one more time. It said, according to Open Doors, many foreign Christians have left the country and local Christians are facing increasing persecution. On top of that, the country's been dealing with civil war and famine, just as I was telling you. Despite these factors, there have been reports of Christianity growing greatly. The power vacuum created by the Civil War has allowed radical Islamist groups to gain significant influence. Christians have been killed and abducted by Islamic radicals, including 16 people killed in an attack on a Christian care home for the elderly. This is the important part. And this right here is what relates to what Bishop's doing. One Muslim convert named Jami, who is now a pastor, told Open Doors that after foreign Christians were forced to leave at the start of the Civil War, the local Christians were unsure how the church would survive. He said, now the foreigners are mostly gone, we actually had to take the lead ourselves. At first it seemed the house church movement would fall apart. But gradually local Christians started taking responsibility, took up leadership positions. They may not have been highly trained, but they share the knowledge they have and support each other. It says this adversity seems to strengthen the church. And here's the thing. We've gone from missionaries going in and the missionaries standing up and teaching the people to enabling the people themselves to get trained, get exposed, and learn how to talk to others about spreading the gospel. And I believe that's what Bishop's doing. And I just thought it'd be important for you to understand that what Bishop's doing is not just another missionary work. It's not a missionary going over and working in terms of standing up and preaching to the multitudes and being there for 6 months or a year or whatever and having them people tied to them. This same thing is going on in Iran right now. And I'll switch over to it. The Iran protests are continuing. In fact, I just looked online before I come in. Do you guys know who Mahsa Amini is? Have you heard that name? I think you will eventually know that name. Mahsa Amini is the young lady that took her mask off, or took her covering off. Hijab. Yeah, hijab, took it off, and they ended up killing her. Well, she's been a rallying point. She's I believe she's from the Kurdish region, I believe so. Anyhow, today was the 40th day since her death. About a week or so, during that week after them killing her, they started having riots, and I told you a few weeks ago it was mostly young women that was promoting this. Well, this thing is growing and growing and growing, and now today they had a Mahsa Amini Day, and in her hometown, and there were thousands. The thing that's important here to remember is that in Iran right now, they have not seen such protest And it's stepping up, the question to ask today, is it a protest or a revolution? Since the day of the Shah of Iran being run out of the country, the people that took over, the Islamic religious radicals, I'll put it that way, they took over after the Shah was run out of the country. They've not seen anything like this, and they're not controlling it. It's getting bigger instead of smaller. So there's a great deal happening right there in front of us as far as this. And a lot of this, we've been told, I know the pastor talked about it a year ago, how fast Christianity is growing in Iran. And these are the type of things that we're seeing that is the culmination that Jesus is telling us in the end times. This is what's going to happen, that there's going to be a large turning in some parts of the world. Some parts of the world, and I think the United States is one of them, England's another one, you've been exposed a long time ago, and you've rode up the hill with the Christianity and being God-fearing and setting a country on the right tracks, and then you kind of got full of yourselves and you're just kind of thinking you're in charge instead of God, and that's what we're seeing now. And there's payment for that. If you look back through the Old Testament time and time again, God repaid with that. He's always got his loving arms and mercies out there, but at the same time, he only tolerates so much. And so the thing of it is, and you've heard me say this before, don't keep judging what's going on in the world by what's happening here, because it's not. We're a small cog in the wheel. When you especially look at population, we're less than 400 million people, or around 400 million people out of the 8 billion that's in the world. And remember that 1040 rule, that most of the people that have not yet been exposed to the gospel are in that area. And like this young pastor in Yemen, and like what the people that Bishop's training and exposing, that's how the word's getting spread now. That through the internet, but mainly through people that that sees the word, wants to react to the word, and organizations like what Bishop's doing is teaching them how to do it effectively. So thought I'd just throw that out tonight. Before we get out of the Middle East, Israel is pounding Hezbollah in Syria really, really hard. And the reason being is Russia's been pulling out. Russia's pulled their troops out, their missiles. They're not completely out of it, don't get me wrong, but Russia's not paying a lot of attention to what's going on in Syria right now. And Israel's in there just pounding the dickens out of all the stuff that Iran's been shipping into Syria. There was, they hit an ammo dump this week right at the Damascus airport and blew it. Actually, it wasn't a dump, it was a convoy of trucks that was bringing in supplies from Iran to the terrorists in Syria, and they took it out. Let's talk about Europe for a couple of minutes. Iran, you've heard me talk about other countries that's told their people to leave Ukraine. Iran come out this week and told all their people that's in the Ukraine to leave. So here again, it's just another indication there's more and more evidence mounting that something's going to happen over there and it's not going to be good on a large scale. One reason we know that, the Russian defense minister this week met with the French defense minister, and the French minister said after he'd left, he said that the Russian defense minister said they're on the verge of escalation that is uncontrollable. What that means is somebody's going to do something that there's no turning back from. That's what he's talking about. At the same time, we have, and this is interesting, this pastor and I kind of bounced this back and forth the other day a little bit. The first thing that come out was Russia saying that the Ukraine is going to make a dirty bomb and set it off. All right, a dirty bomb, if you're not familiar, is where you take a conventional weapon and you put something that's radioactive with it, so when it goes off in that area, it makes it radioactive. And the thought occurred to me, wow, wonder if Ukraine could set that off and use that as an excuse to try to bring NATO and the United States and everybody else into the conflict, blaming it on Russia. Well, 2 days later, the Ukrainians are saying, well, the Russians are going to set the bomb off. And you could look at it both ways. You really could. If Russia sets it off, of course, that brings NATO into the mix. If Ukraine sets it off, it still brings NATO into the mix. So that may be part of what this Russian defense minister is talking about. Russia says that they have some information showing that Ukraine's been taking some radioactive material out of one of the nuclear plants, and that's what they're going to use for this, but they haven't shown any hard data on it. Russia continues to bomb the utilities in Ukraine. They took out more. Kyiv was totally blacked out yesterday. I don't know if the juice is back on up there or not. And you got to remember, we talked about this the other day, if you draw 40-degree latitude, it kind of goes through the southern end of Ukraine, just north of the Black Sea they're on the same level as us. We're roughly at 38, 39 degree, 40-degree latitude here. The weather's very similar. Kiev right now would be similar to being middle upper Michigan. So it's a lot colder in Kiev. And they were blacked out yesterday. And like I said, I'd not followed up on it to see if they've got juice back or not. Also talking about in Europe, you guys pick up on the new Britain Prime Minister? Yeah. What religion is he? Anybody know? Hindu. He is the first non-white, non-Christian Prime Minister in history of Britain. And the lady that was in before him, she spent 46 days, I think, as Prime Minister. She was elected by the Conservative Party. Now, you got to remember, when we say Conservative Party in the UK, they're progressive. They're not Conservative Party like we think Conservative Party, okay? But she was kind of a midliner. And anyhow, she lasted 46 days, and she was literally forced out of office. Never happened before in England either. She was forced out, shortest prime minister in history, and she's forced out by the globalist that's trying to run Europe. Stop and think about that. And that's not just somebody putting a tag on it. Other than this, get this. They've been talking, I just picked up on this afternoon. They are crying over in Europe now that they want to they say that if you call someone a globalist, you're being anti-Semitic. They don't want you calling them globalist. And what they're trying to do now is tie that to being, they're saying when you do that, you're talking against the Jews. Well, you're not. And but that's what they're trying to create now. I really laughed when I saw that. And they don't miss a trick. But the globalists forced this lady out. This guy is super, super rich. He's part of the Davos and the elites that are talking about elites financially that's running this world. This guy's right in the mix of it. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes out from him. But the globalists are in charge if you're in England. There's no doubt about it. And really, they're pretty much in charge of the European Union. If you get a chance, you might Google up and listen to the Prime Minister of Hungary, or the President of Hungary, talk about Hungary's having a real problem in the European Union now because the European Union's trying to dictate to them, they're part of the EU, but they're trying to dictate to them what they will and won't do and how they can do it. And the head of Hungary's fighting that. And evidently he's got pretty good rapport with these people too, because they're backing him on this. So not all is well in the European Union. The other thing that's going on in Europe, of course, we're coming into winter. We've talked about how tough a winter is going to be for them. Their inflation's far worse than ours right now. Ours is growing that direction, but theirs is far worse than ours. In France, there was 100,000 people poured out in the streets this last week protesting against higher prices of fuel and food. And we've talked about before, the number one cause for social unrest, cut off people's food. And you cut it off either by it not being there, or you get it so expensive they can't afford it, and that's what's happening. Let's go to China. I don't know if you followed on that. Great big happenings in China this week. Xi Jinping has his third term now. And I don't know if you caught on this or not, but it's really interesting. The news didn't cover it much. I saw a video of it. Right when they were getting ready to confirm him, they come up and ushered this older gentleman that was sitting up in the front row. They ushered him out. His name is Hu Jintao. Yeah, Jintao, Jintao. He was kind of a carryover of the old governments. He had actually served with 3 of the premiers. He was considered an intellectual. He was guiding them. The reason they had kept him around was he was evidently very intelligent and had an ability to put things together and see the big picture. And he kind of kept them in line a little bit as far as at least challenging them. Hey, you maybe don't want to do this because this may happen. Well, Xi Jinping doesn't have that problem anymore. That man's gone. The people of China don't know it. They hid that from their own people when that he was removed out of the Politburo. Xi Jinping now has 7 people running the country with him. Every one of them is handpicked, and every one of them has been a follower of his for years. Every one of them, if you look back on their biographies, had something important duty in the country in different provinces as Xi Jinping was coming into power, and he's brought them along with him. So here's the big danger. You've got 7 yes men. There's nobody to stand there and say, whoa, whoa, time out, maybe we better think about this. That's the reason they got rid of the old guy. He was the one that challenged him once in a while. Very dangerous situation. The other thing I would throw out to you, it increases the need that probably the communists are going to go ahead and move on Taiwan pretty quickly. Here's the reason why. A year ago, China had the fastest growing, most productive economy in the world. In 1 year's time, you think now things happen quickly anymore. In 1 year's time, they have one of the fastest declining economies in the world. They are in serious, serious trouble. It started with the housing market, where they had overbuilt, planning on people coming into these cities. There's cities over there, there's towns, apartment complexes, 95, 100,000 people, they're empty. Been empty for a couple years now. And they were betting on the comes, what they were doing, and it didn't come. Now, what that's done, and I know a year ago in Bible study we talked a little bit about this, that the economy over there, the biggest problem they had was in this building in real estate. You heard me talking here a few weeks ago about the young lady that was forced to take a mortgage out on a house that hadn't even been built, and then they're coming back and forcing her to pay for it because they say, we're not going to let your child go to school here if you don't continue paying on this mortgage type deal. That's all starting to crash to the point now, who's the number 1 steel producer in the world? China. Who's the number 1 supplier of iron ore now in the world? China. That, out of all their companies, 80% of them are to the point right now they're getting ready to file bankruptcy. 80% of their steel companies now. Stop, think about that. And the reason being is because internally the entire market's fallen apart. They were booming when they were building all these buildings. There's so much steel goes, they build things a little different than we do. They're mainly steel and concrete. And that's falling apart. So it's starting to tumble downhill. But here's why they might need to stop and think about it. Why would Xi Jinping need to invade Taiwan? Times are going to get bad in China. It'll be worse than they are here. Who's going to get blamed?
Trump.
Xi Jinping's not going to. He's going to blame it on Taiwan. He's going to go ahead and start the war with Taiwan and move into Taiwan, and then tell the people the reason things are so tough is because we had to go to war against Taiwan. He's been prepping these people for way over a year that there's going to be war with Taiwan. And now, with the way things have gone, the people would rise up against the government when things get really bad this winter, and they're going to. So it looks like it'd be very, very likely for him to start a war. That's always been in history. You want to calm people down, things are bad, you want to stay in power, go fight a war. It's happened time and time and time again. All you got to do is read your history. Okay, last 2 minutes, real quick, I'll blow through this. In the USA, remember the Bill Clinton and the free trade agreement, or NAFTA, North American Free Trade. Remember all that? Where they're going to tie United States, Canada, Mexico together. It's going to be great. Well, at that time, the push was put on to make United States, Mexico, and Canada one country. All right? Governed together. That's when the push started. Well, guess what? It's back on the table. And now it's not just 3 people, it's all 35 American countries. They on the table. This has been a UN thing, and what got slipped out, the president of Mexico this last week met with Blinken, who's our Secretary of State, and he let it slip out that one of the prime things they talked about was creating a European Union type deal with the American states. There's 35 countries involved. They want them all to be governed together, just like the European Union. If you know how the European Union is put together, just think about it, put it here over the North and South American countries. That's exactly what they're talking about. And the president of Mexico let it slip out. That's what him and Blinken were meeting on. So that's, and what it is, it's interesting to note China has extremely close ties with 7 of the 35 countries. So they've got their hand in the mix too. The Homeland Security Senate Committee this week voted to advance a digital ID system for here in the United States. Because, folks, you've got to be able to prove who you are, right? That's their byline. That's why they're telling you it's got to be done. Homeland Security's got to be able for you to prove who you are. So they're working now they funded it. They're working on a digital ID system. We did have some wins this week. All this stuff that came out of COVID, where the government overstepped its bounds, it's taken this long for this stuff to get through the courts. But almost every situation where the government's being sued with stuff where they overstepped their bounds, the court's upholding the people, not the government. They've lost almost every one. The other thing is, you've heard me talk about ESG, the economic, social governance, that the banks are all using now. 19 states, including our own, thank goodness, are working against that. They're working against the ESG banks. What they're telling the banks and some of these large investment firms, if you're going to pursue this ESG stuff, where that if you're a Nabisco biscuit maker and to get your ESG score higher, you fund a transgender parade or whatever, that goes into their score. That's how they're measuring these things. We're going to take our money out of it. That's what the states are suing over. States are saying, we're going to take our retirement funds that we control, and you're talking about a lot of money. But there's 19 states going together. They're going to remove funds from these banks and these lending institutions like Blackstone, take the money out. We're not going to invest with you. So that's happening. That's a win. I'm sorry I ran 5 minutes over, Bishop, but it's all yours. We're glad to have you back.